This is Beyond the Matrix, Introduction to the Real Season 1 Chapter 6. In this episode, we will be talking about the experience of the real and linking it to the creative act associated with sublimation. As stated in the last episode, the source has many attributes of which the real is only one. The real is constantly unfurling into form, fashioned according to the contingency of our need. The fluidity of form is the manifestation of the real in each moment, responding to our true nature, and the need underlying that nature. In every social exchange, during each encounter with another person, we experience 9 levels of conversation, 9 narratives, which affirm specific impulses found in our being. We may either respond in an affirmatory fashion to these narratives and thus integrate them into our action, or we may reject the narrative, responding with negation. On the one hand, the 9 dialogues are the product of ego-recursive narratives generated to facilitate the tautology of self in others. On the other, these ego-recursive narratives are tautological precisely because they conscript us in the fulfillment of their self-love. Thus, we facilitate their self-love by manifesting that ego-recursion in our lives according to the scenarios that those narratives generate. More precisely, this tautology of self, these recursive narratives generated to facilitate the self-love of others, thus promulgate their affirmatory narratives laterally and down through the telescopic effect. Thus, in rejection of those narratives, we are undermining the ego-recursive narratives of self-love for others. But in this there can be a good. For these ego-recursive narratives are temporal. They are global, yes, but they remain anchored to materialist conception of reality. They displace the truth of the real with the forms of substance. We can see this in the following fashion. In the rejection of affirmation, the impulse is available for sublimation, which only occurs through the union of dualistic opposites within the self. Thus, the oneness of the real is experienced most acutely when one sublimates precisely, because of the contradiction between the ego-recursive narrative of affirmation meets the differing narrative of negation regarding the same impulse. In this fusion of 2 opposing narratives, one achieves comprehension of the real as existing within a single space, within a single vessel, created only when one achieves the cognitive dissonance necessary to facilitate this union. Now, sublimation is only the first step. For in deferring action, according to a narrative of affirmation generated by the 9 dialogues, one is creating an opportunity for witnessing the real, independent of form. This comprehension gives one access to another attribute of the real, namely its creative power. For in the union of narratives of opposing orientation, there is a spark of creation, which owes itself to recognition of the source. One of the fundamental qualities of the source is thus the creative act, the unfurling, the blossoming, which one might only access through the sublimation, an internal union created in the deferral of an ego-recursive narrative. To be clear, there is indeed comprehension of the oneness of the real within the union of opposites created within the 9 dialogues, through the unity of the all in all. This is one pathway toward comprehension of the real. Thus, the creative act can likewise be generated in the shadow of this union of forms. But so too can it be found in spiritual pursuits, in the sublimation, or deferral of an affirmatory impulse into the shadow of its union with negation. The second point I would like to clarify is that when I speak about the system being binary, or dualistic, what I am talking about are 2 things. First, it is binary because the system demands expression of any impulse, and thus, there is no degree of expression, no gradation of an impulse. The system's response to any nascent impulse is the same, affirmation, and that affirmation is sufficient for it. This means that the only possible options for an actor are negation, or accession to affirmation. Second, I refer to the system as dualistic, or dialectical, because the facility of man to think in terms of sameness and difference. This sole characteristic of man's thought processes, the simple, relative relation between subject and object, they and them, me and you, compels system members to structure themselves into in-groups and out-groups. Even if we accede ourselves to a categorization which possesses a totality of inclusion, Such a totality would ultimately defy recognition of the real, replacing the all in all of man constructed on the multiplicity of form, with the unity, or oneness of the real. Thus, there will always be a choice to negate, which will always produce othering, in groups and out-groups. To think otherwise is the highest folly, because it defies the existence of the real. That's the end of the podcast for today. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment and subscribe.